Welcome to Free to Speak, the New Zealand Free Speech Union podcast. If you enjoy the show, subscribe for uncensored conversations and free speech news from New Zealand and beyond.
Kia ora and welcome to Free to Speak, the official podcast of the New Zealand Free Speech Union. I'm your host, Andrew O, council member of the New Zealand Free Speech Union. Joining me today is Forough Amin. Forough is a member of the Persian community here in New Zealand and is the founder of Iranian Women in New Zealand. Forough, glad you could be here with us today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So explain for us a little bit about this NGO and what you do and who you are.
Thank you so much. So Iranian Women in New Zealand is a charity organization founded in 2020. And our main mission is supporting the Iranian community in New Zealand, especially women and also their families. We do lots of community work, advocacy, education, art, and culture in normal days. And when it comes to the situation like the one we are in right now, we do a little bit of advocacy for the community. And also, in my personal capacity, I'm an activist. I do lots of advocacy for the Iranian women and the Iranian community in general.
So you're here today because there is a ferocious war happening now in Iran. The US and Israel is attacking the regime. Whether this will lead to regime change or what, we don't quite know. There's all sorts of reports coming out. It's hard to know exactly what's happening. I hear now that the Kurds may get involved. I mean, that's another complication that, many of our supporters and New Zealanders generally probably don't know about. Many wouldn't even know what a Kurd is, and we can't blame them for that. This is a distant land and a very complex land with lots of different groups and ethnicities in it. But it is timely that we have a discussion with you because there's a lot of information out there or misinformation out there about the Iranian regime and what's best for Iran. There's a lot of people who seem to think they know what's best for Iran.
Yeah.
Who, probably, I know it's a free speech union, but sometimes it pays to do that. So I think you're going to be very informative in terms of being able to take us back a little bit on how we got to this point.
Okay.
Some of the censorship that the Iranian people have had to sort of suffer and what it's like being an activist in New Zealand. I think that's what really this interview is going to be about. So maybe let's just start on a little bit of the background. How did we get to this place?
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I think starting from history would be a good, point. In early 20th century, Iran was a collapsing, country. It was fragmented. The Shah, the monarchs were very weak. Foreign interference was huge. We lost big parts of territories to Russian, for example, in mid 19th century. So the parts that the countries like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, they were all part of Iran. And we lost them to Russia in early 19th century.
So that's the Tsar. The Tsar was taking that land.
Yes. So it was during the Russians. So in some treaties, Turkmenchai and Golestan treaties. So one of the two infamous treaties that Iranians signed because they defeated in wars with Russia. So, and that's how we lost these territories. Or on the other hand, we lost Afghanistan that was part of Persian Empire, for thousands of years to Britain. So Britain and Russia was just intervening, in Iran. And it continued actually, during the First World War and the Second World War with very disastrous, consequences for Iran. So when Reza Shah came to power, he was an illiterate person, I think he went to school until 5th grade, but he has such a strong will, and desire to, develop his country, to make Iran great, if you like. So he started rapid, transformation of the country from centralizing the state, from a modern education.
And when did he come into power? Sorry, Forough?
1921, he became the king in 1921. He came to power, I think, like 1920 or so. He became the prime minister, and then after that he became the king. So the country was very weak, and what he did, he was in the army, and he was a commander of the army. So he, with the help of some of the forces, they came to Tehran. So it was a coup, in fact, what he did. But it was something that he felt like he need to do that to save Iran, because the Shah of that time was a young boy of the son of the previous Shah, and he couldn't rule the country actually. So he came to power, and I think he ruled with a iron fist. No, I think rarely people doubt it, but the outcome of what he did for Iran has been great. Universities opened, public education started, and many different institutions for preservation of culture, language, and art in Iran. So many of these beautiful places for poets and for philosophers, Iranians, the old ones, were built during his time. So it was a time of rebuilding national identity for Iranian. And in terms of economy, in terms of railroads and opening of factories, so rapid modernization in Iran started during Reza Shah. And then World War II came. Again, Iran was, the land of Iran was in hands of Britain and also Russia. So some Britain from south and Russia from north. Russia was our. So at that time, it was Soviet Union. It wasn't Russia anymore. Soviet Union,
Starlet, yeah.
yeah, it was our northern, neighbor. And then we had Britain coming from, the south of the country. So they were using Iranian territory in order to find, Germany. And at that time, the Shah, the Reza Shah, he actually wanted to stay neutral. But at the same time, he was leaning toward Germany. Not because he loved Hitler, but because the history, the record for Soviet Union, for Russians, and for British wasn't great in Iran. Iranians had all that bad memories from these two countries intervening. I just explained how we lost territories, because of these two countries. That's why at that time Reza Shah was thinking Germany is a new power, and we haven't had that bad kind of history with them. So that was the reason. But when he was pressured by Britain and by Soviet Union, he accepted to be completely neutral, but it was kind of late, and he forced him to step down. Very sad, actually, page in the history of Iran. If you read the history, he, all he wanted was for his country to stay great and to progress. That's why he accepted to step down, and he just asked his prime minister, one of the greatest men in Iranian history. His name is Muhammad Ali Foroughi. So he was a wise man, and actually, I think he saved Iran several times, during his time as a prime minister, and he was a philosopher as well. So, anyways, he had negotiations with Britain and with Soviet, Union, just encouraging them to accept that the Shah stepped down, but his son become the next Shah. So Mohammad Reza Shah. They didn't like it actually, but I can say Foroughi, he tricked them somehow. If you read the history, so at the time when British and Soviet forces were moving to Tehran to capture the capital and doesn't allow Mohammad Reza Shah to become the king, he, without anybody knowing, took the crown prince to the parliament, and they did all the ceremony they needed, to announce him as a king. And when the allied forces came to Tehran, they arrived, they see that, oh, everything is done, and he's the king of the country, Mohammad Reza Shah. So they had to accept it. And it was the start of Mohammad Reza Shah, the last Shah of Iran, or the Shah that, everybody knows him. So he was very young. He was 21-year-old, I think, when he came to power. And what he did was that he tried to continue what his father started. And, compared to his father, he was educated, he knew the modern world, he knew several languages. So he was well prepared for his position as a Shah. And he made lots of different types of efforts, to take Iran to the next level. And I think he was successful in many ways. One of the biggest things that he did inside the country is called White Revolution. So it was a series of reforms that he decided to do, like land reforms, taking the land from like so-called feudals and, dividing it among the farmers, for example. And then we had literacy corps, young people finishing their high school. They were going as corps to like remote areas in the country to educate people. So women's suffrage, giving the right to women, to vote, and many kind of this kind of social, cultural, and also economic reform. Actually, he was kind of socialist. That's interesting that he's always accused of being a tyrant on the side of the West, but his ideas and the way he was trying to do reforms was a socialist, very welfare oriented kind of reforms.
Do you know how my early experience of the Shah, reading books about Hollywood, and
Oh,
I would see him at very famous actors from the 1950s and 60s. He was at their parties.
yes,
There
yes.
was lots of, like, I love Danny Kaye, who was an amazing Jewish performer, and he used to like entertaining and cooking for people. And I
Mm,
remember this image of Danny Kaye cooking Chinese food for the Shah
yes.
in Hollywood. So he was friends with a lot of the old Hollywood actors and stuff.
I think he was one of the first level, leaders of the world at his time, in terms of, his understanding and his familiarity with the world level culture, in terms of languages he knew, relationship that he had with many leaders of the world. So one of the, I think, rare cases, in our at least modern history. So he had some mistakes, obviously, but I think what he did for the country, like his father, is far beyond, the mistakes that he made at the time. And I always say that when we want to judge the history, we should put it in the context. We should consider the time of, his rule, when he was, in power, and what was happening around him, in the Middle East and around the whole world. Usually one of the things when I talk about the crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, and how Iranian people are supporting him, many people, including journalists, asking me, what, wasn't his father a tyrant? Wasn't he so cruel? How is that you want, his son to be in power? And then, I just answer this question with another question. I tell them, do you think in 50 years, or even let's say in 100 years, Iranian would go to the street and calling the name of Khamenei or his son? And they say, absolutely not. I say, okay, so if he was such a tyrant as you are saying, how is that we Iranians now calling his son's, name? So I think much of the history that we have got has been written by Islamists or leftists, the two groups who were opposing him, and the two groups who finally could topple, him from power by the support from the West.
I think to put this in context, because this is, I've heard that a lot too, that like, oh, he was brutal.
Yeah,
What people are basically saying is, what's the difference? But there's a big difference
there is.
between someone like Saddam Hussein and
Mhm.
Hosni Mubarak in
Mm,
Egypt. He was a strong man, Hosni Mubarak, but he
yes,
was putting down the Muslim Brotherhood. He was tasked with keeping a potentially very volatile situation, a lid on a very volatile situation. So when we speak about the Shah and what he was having to deal with, there would have been repression of Marxist, extreme and extreme Islamist factions, but we're not talking tens of thousands of people.
no, 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 at all. And even not Hosni Mubarak. If I want to compare, I compare him to Anwar Sadat. They were good friends, their relationship is one of the rare ones, in the history, I think, when two leaders had such a close relationship.
And Sadat was a leader of Egypt around the late 70s.
Yes, 70s, around the same time, and he was assassinated by Islamists.
By the Muslim Brotherhood, and actually made peace with
Israel.
Israel and
Yes,
orientated Egypt away from the Soviet Union to the US. That was
yes,
Sadat that did that. Yeah. So
exactly.
very, very courageous man.
Yeah, he signed the Camp David, and he was the first, and I think the only Arab leader who has gone to the Israeli Knesset to give a speech. So he was a extraordinary man that who, like many of great people, people did not understand it at his time, even now. So in terms of this, accusations of Shah being such a brutal, leader, if you just want to compare, the number of people who were in prison, executed during his time, and, the ones who have been executed, killed during the time of the Islamic Republic, you cannot even compare, the worst kind of stats that you get about the number of people being executed during Shah, it gives you 180 people. And we are talking around, about the timing of around 40 years, between 100 to 180 political prisoners.
With a population back then of like tens of millions of people.
Of course, of course. I think
Hmm.
the population should be at least something around 40 million, not less than that. I'm not sure about the population of Iran at that time. But
Could have
just
been 60 or 70. Yeah.
the number is just, and
Hmm.
then in Iran, each year, at least 1,000 people have been executed in the last 47 years.
On
So
average.
yes. On average, if we want to say, so something between 600 to 1,000 or 1,000, 1,000, yeah, people have been executed. And if we just don't say 47 years, we say 40 years. So 40,000 executed. And it doesn't include the number of protesters last month. At least 40,000 were massacred in the streets of Iran last year. And it doesn't include the number of political prisoners, lefties. Majority of them were lefties in early years after Islamic Republic came to power in 1981-82. 5,000 were killed, executed in the prisoners.
Well, there was a big purge after the war with Iraq too, I believe. Mujahideen and different people
Yes,
were,
yes,
yeah.
yes, exactly. So this regime has killed hundreds of thousands of people at different stages. They talk about, SAWAK, the intelligence, organization of the Shah, and there are lots of, stories about that. But I think many of them, if you put them in perspective, is not even comparable. And as I said, the history, unfortunately, has been written by enemies of Shah by leftists. Just look at the universities, academia, who are writing all the books. Even for us as Iranians, just raised up under this regime. We either had access to the Islamist sources, the ones written by this regime, or the ones written by leftist academia. And for us, even takes years, to do your personal independent study to understand what the realities on the ground was. And just, let me compare again in terms of where Iran was and where it is now. For the Pahlavi dynasty, Reza Shah and his son Mohammad Reza Shah, they ruled around 50 years. And as I said, they transformed Iran from a backwarded, collapsing, country to such a big regional, and I can say even Iran was becoming a global power in late 1970s. And then it took around another 50 years for this regime to see what they made, to Iran. So that's a good way of looking, how the situation was and how it is now.
Yeah, well, I would call the current state a failed state,
It is. Yeah.
because when you think about, a lot of people argue with me about this, but I think that any anti-democratic, not just not democratic, but anti-democratic state to me is a failed state, because all the human capital isn't used the way it could be. It should be a world power. you know?
Even apart from that, in terms of economy, in terms of progress
Yeah.
for the country, they done
Mm,
nothing. Whatever
nothing.
they done had just destroyed this country. We are losing thousands of people due to air pollution, because of the heart attack due to air pollution, due to the car accidents on the roads. Thousands of people, something around, I don't have the numbers now in my mind, but it's, like 10 times more than what we see in Germany, for example, roads, where there is a free, there is no speed limit on the roads. So it's, yeah.
But the interesting thing about that, I was thinking about this the other day. I did a post about it. Like, when you think about what's happened in the current war, one of the first things they did was just fire missiles on all the neighboring Arab countries. Now, many of those Gulf states had tolerated Iran. They
Yes.
weren't prepared to go that far with them, yet what thanks did they get? They got so that is just absolutely ridiculous, a ridiculous strategy. But it sort of says that when a state is that ideological, I wonder, when you progress in a state like that, you're probably progressing because of purity to the ideology rather than competence.
Yes. Yes.
Which, we even see in with woke culture in the West. Like, often it's people that are obedient to the culture
Yeah.
rather than competent that will rise up. Now, I'm not in any way trying to compare the two, but
Mhm.
anytime ideology gets its claws in, you're going to see an incompetent government, really.
Exactly. I think, when it comes to ideology, it doesn't bring anything good to the world, to the humankind. Sometimes people are, deluded thinking that no, we have some good ideologies, And I was like that, 2 years ago, I'm coming from, my journey has been fascinating, I think. I started in my early youth years, I was religious. I became religious. I'm coming from a family that my dad was a political prisoner, No one in my family was religious. And then I went to the university and I was like surrendered, by all this, surrounded by all these religious friends. And I became a very religious person, just, wearing hijab and becoming like that for like 4 or 5 years. And after that, I, came out. I become who I was actually. And but still I had these leftist ideas in myself, strong orientation towards justice and human rights and all these stuff, good things, until around 2 3 years ago. And what happened with Palestine Israel war, it changed a lot in me. It made me to reflect more, to reconsider my ideologies, and I did lots of research, studying the history from ancient times, this the history of the region, coming to the present time, and all the details in that. And it made me to come to this understanding that no ideology is really helping in any ways to us. It just makes us makes our understanding of the world black and white. And that's what ideology has done to us. Just come to the issue of Iran. The fact is that, for example, Westerners, they never really support us, support us Iranians. And at that time, I was thinking maybe the reason is that they don't care about, what's happening in other parts of the world, unless one part of it is, Western in any form. So even during Women Life Freedom 2022, uprising in Iran, we didn't receive, that much of solidarity from Western human rights activists, feminists. Although somebody were calling it like the first, feminist kind of revolution in the modern history, but nobody supported us. And at that time, I was thinking the reason is Islamophobia. And we could hear it from many people because we were, protesting hijab, compulsory hijab. Many people thought, okay, we are against, the religion, or we are insulting the other people's faith. And it was, really shocking how they were turning our struggle and misery to make it about themselves. It wasn't about, another religion or, other people. It was about us and our situation. And now with what's happening currently, in the world, have so many people who were silent about the sufferings of Iranians. And I'm not talking about like years ago, I'm talking about 2 months ago in January. I can describe to you how we Iranians were feeling in diaspora. So when we talk about at least 40,000 being killed, it means, you can rarely find anyone who doesn't know someone who has been killed, who has been injured or arrested. The streets were full of bodies. And we had internet, blackout for 2 weeks. We didn't know anything about our families. And it was interesting to see nobody cares. We were just waiting for our friends to reach out, our neighbors, media. Nobody came to us. When I say nobody, in terms of, for example, media and journalists, I literally mean it. Nobody came to do some interview or asking us, for a lifetime. And we thought, okay, they don't care about us. Let's accept it. That's, our situation. We should, do something about it. But in like last week, it started from last week, everybody is rushing to us. And we are thinking, but why? Where were you? Like around a month ago, why you were silent? And now if you are talking, why we are not supporting us? Why you are going to talk, over us and against us? So, in general, I think morality, selectivity of morality, or loss of the morality compass is the main issue, the main question of our world, today. It seems like, and it is because of ideology. So, how it's related to the topic of ideology, I think people only show sympathy and only speak about, against some harms when it's, aligns with their ideology. Otherwise, they just stay silent.
Yeah, I mean, I try to make sense of this. Like, I don't know why a leftist would support an Islamist at all. It makes no sense to me. An Islamist, in my view, is someone on the hard right.
But it's not new. You know that it's not new. In 1979, the same thing happens. What brought this Islamic regime in power was the unholy marriage of leftists and Islamists. I think leftists have always been used by Islamists, and they never really seems to understand it.
Do you think it's the promise of revolution? They are just so drunk on the idea of tipping everything over and starting again. And they think an Islamist can do that. You know, an
And the
Islamist is gonna
hatred.
just absolutely throw everything off the chessboard. We're gonna get a clean slate, and with that clean slate, we can do all these fantastic things. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm an evolutionary. You know, like I believe in and you know, free speech is a part of that. You make your argument. Sometimes you don't win the argument straight away, but if you can keep making the argument, we progress. You know, society gets a chance to digest some of these ideas. Eventually, we may get there or not. You know, like in the marketplace of ideas. But the idea of just
Yeah.
being able to tip everything off that chessboard and start again to me is just it's messianic and it's only going to end in tragedy, and it only really has ended in tragedy.
And I think it's not just this idea of revolution and how much they love it. It's mainly hatred, and I'm sorry to say that, but as an Iranian, and given these new circumstances we in, I can tell you that they are driven by hatred and hatred of the West. And that's what makes them to go and get aligned with Islamists because they both share this. When modernity arrived in the region, Islamists, felt threatened and started their war against any aspect of modernization. And at the same time, leftists, because of the anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, ideas, that, part of that is the history. Nobody can deny the fact that there was a history of colonization and imperialist, ideas and measures, that were taken by the Western. So this hatred, this fight that they feel like they have to have it against the West is something that unite them together. As I said in 1979, if it wasn't because of the communists, the leftists coming together and helping Islamists, they wouldn't be able to overthrow the regime. And at that time, we had Democrats in power in the US. We had Carter in power. He was, on the leftist, side of the spectrum. And he was, we can say, complicit, or he was, he agreed to what was happening in Iran. And all the West, they supported Khomeini to come to power. France gave the airplane to him, to come and land, in Iran. And Shah, again, going back to him, if he was such a, dictator, he wouldn't leave the country and going to exile. He would stay and use his, forces to kill people. The reason that army surrendered, to the Islamic, revolution was because the Shah left the country. And he left the country because he said, I don't want to build my throne, in the blood of my people. I just wanted good things for my people. And what happened to him? No country gave refuge to him. For around, I think it took few months for him until finally his friend Anwar Sadat, greeted him to his, country. UK and US and no other country wanted him to go even and have a refuge. While he was sick, he had cancer, Shah was becoming more and more powerful, especially with the oil prices, and he was a stabilizing, leader force in the region. He never had like diplomatic relationship with Israel like the formal ones, but he had close relationship with Israel. He had close relationship with the Arab countries as well. So he was able to to stabilize the whole region. And because, as I said, we Iranians, like many other parts of the world, in the East, we have bad memories, from the time of Britain and other European Western powers. So he was standing against them, dictating what he needs to do. And when you become too powerful, then you might seem dangerous, threatening to other countries. And it was how I think US was thinking of Shah, especially during the time of Carter. And also, I think they were thinking they were undermining the threat from Islamists. And I think they are doing it right now as well. At that time, they were thinking, oh, these mullahs, they are not going to be a threat to us. Just let them what they want to do. And it seems that people are liking them as well. And many did, not because they like mullahs, because I think they had that luxury of a basic life to desire for better. And these mullahs were telling them, we are going to give you free power, free water, free buses, something like Mamdani is promising people in New York to give them. And people said, okay, why not, if we can get better. And these religious people, they had some credibility among, people, because until then, they never were in power, really. They always were, on the side. And when you are not in the game, you can never show your true, self. So people were thinking we can trust them. They are the holy people, they are representatives of the God, until they came to power and show their true face. So I think maybe US were also fooled, that, they are not going to be such a big threat for us. But I think the history showed, they came to power and what they did, to the whole region and the whole world.
Well, it's a very destructive ideology. Like I was reading up that like a lot of the Shia that I know tend to be a bit more moderate people, but this is a form of Shia that's developed in the regime that is quite inspired by the Brotherhood in some Sunni aspects. So it's a little bit more complex than that.
Close ties,
Um,
close ties.
mm,
At the time when during the Shah, for example, Khomeini and some of these Islamist military or army groups, in Iran had close ties with Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood is Sunni and they are Shia. But when it comes to fighting the West and fighting their enemy, they are together. And what else I wanted to say about this? So when it comes about the religion, the fact is that majority of religious people are just normal people living their lives. In our Iranian society, 90 million people, still many people are religious, and it's just something personal about them. But when we talk about Islam, is about political Islam, those people who want to use Islam as a political force to rule the society. And it is when it becomes really dangerous. And I think that's what we see, around the world, those activists, those, political people who want to use Islam as an identity, like identity politics, when it's based on religion. I think it's dangerous. It doesn't matter what type of, religion it is. And what this regime in Iran, they did, they helped many people around the world, many Islamists to become politically active and trying to bring their Islamic rule to the society they are living. And that's where the threat is coming from.
Yeah, like Lebanon, which I mean, I really feel sorry for Lebanon
Mm.
because that's a country that could be quite progressive and forward thinking, but Hezbollah being there has really been such an undermining
And also
force.
PLO, Hezbollah came, to power, I think in 1983. So after the regime, and actually they were inspired by the regime in Iran. So what was happening during the war, Iraq-Iran war, is that, many Iranians were sacrificing themselves for their country. And we didn't, didn't have a strong army at that time, after like this 8 years of war. So many people were blow themselves on these bombs that were, on the land in order to help the rest of the army to pass from there. So it became what was then, be called suicide kind of, martyrdom bombing or whatever. And then many people, Hezbollah members were inspired by that and they tried to do it. And they were actually trained by the IRGC members. So the same thing with Islamic Jihad, the same thing with PLO. And what happened in Lebanon, I think it was a combination of Hezbollah and PLO. How they started the civil war in Lebanon, not just Lebanon, in Jordan. So I think the harm coming from these Islamists, has covered the whole region, in Syria, in Iraq, in Jordan, in Egypt, in all these places.
I don't think a contemporary activist who's, say, anti-Israel and pro the regime right now would know that the PLO tried to take over Jordan in
Mm. No.
1971,
Yeah.
or that they invaded Lebanon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and they tried
And
to take.
unless
They
you read
wouldn't
the
know.
history independently with open eyes without your ideology, you're not going to get that.
Mm.
Otherwise you will find lots of excuses, to explain any of this. I received a Instagram post by a friend who was telling me, look at this person who's talking about, Iranians and the schoolgirls being killed. And so one of these American activists, so-called activists around the world, who have, now open their mouth to support Iranians by, using the blood of our people, especially these school girls, as a tool to fight their political rivalries. And it is so disgusting. Sorry, the language, but it is really shameless how we see these people, are using the suffering of us in order to fight their own political battle. And that's what we saw in New Zealand Parliament just this week. I don't know if you listen to the leaders of Maori, Labour, and Green Party coming, giving the speeches, and again using the blood of schoolgirls, Iranian schoolgirls, to fight, nationals and to fight ACT and the other, rival parties. And I'm saying, it's really shameless because the same parties like Labour, I was begging them in January that Iranians are being massacred in tens of thousands. Why are you silent? Why you don't post anything at this on social media? And there was no response from them. And then as soon as the US Israel strike started, they rushed to issue statements and to talk about Iranian schoolgirls. Where were you in the last few years,
There are people like Helen Clark, our former prime minister, who want to clearly. I mean, when she was interviewed this week,
Mhm.
and I think our media do a terrible job with her. They're very intimidated by her. They don't push back on her enough. She wasn't talking about I mean, she'd say to clear her throat, yes, the regime is bad, but she said we need to go back to the deal. We need to go back to the nuclear deal. On her mind is not the Iranian people.
No, at
On
all.
her mind is let's freeze this regime in place and create a deal that ensures they never get deposed.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these people aren't being honest with us, and what they're wanting to do is create a counterweight to US and Israel in their minds.
Yeah. Because, if
Yeah.
I hear such a statement or such a claim by someone on the right, national government, I can understand it. I can say they never claim to be on the side of human rights as the ones on left have claimed. Okay, so I say, okay, the only things they care about is about their geopolitics interests. But if you are on the left, if you have always claimed to be the voice of voiceless, how come that now sufferings of Iranian people doesn't bother you? And you just talk about the schoolgirls who you think might be killed by US and Israel. We still don't know. And this regime, just as a reminder, has a long record of using its own people. Just in 2019, they struck a Ukrainian flight and killed around 200 Iranians in one of these conflicts that they had with Israel. And in the recent, uprising in January, they use hospitals, mosques, ambulances, schools for their security forces to fire guns and, to shot their own people. So the chances of this regime is responsible is very high. But anyways, our heart is bleeding for all Iranians, including these young children. And now you pretend that you love them more than us? You care about them more than us? Really shame on you. That's the message, from me and from my whole community to all these parties and people who go to the parliament and talk about Iran just now, because on one side of that is Israel and the US and also the rival party, National Party. And you talk about the schoolgirls in Iran. Didn't you hear about the other 40,000, including schoolgirls and students, who were killed by the regime? Why you didn't say even a word?
Look, let's talk a little bit about censorship in Iran under the Islamic Republic. So how restrictive is it? What is censorship like? I did read a book a few years back, which I'd encourage people to find. It's a really good one. It's called Reading Lolita in
Oh,
Tehran.
yes.
And
The
it's
movie
written,
has come out as well, I think last year.
oh,
Yes,
I
yes.
didn't know that. I'm going to look for that. So the book is about a professor,
Yes.
a female professor
Mhm.
who was teaching English literature in Tehran University, I guess. And she eventually couldn't really discuss some of the books that were on the syllabus anymore. So she'd invite students home,
Mhm.
very dangerous, but she'd
Yes.
invite them home to talk about some books. And Nabokov's Lolita was one of them.
Mm.
A Henry James, maybe Washington Square or one of those books.
Mm.
So every chapter is a different English book, but she finds a theme within the book that speaks about the oppression that her people are going through. And it's just a wonderful, very innovative, very affecting book. I think it's wonderful. So in terms of censorship and living in a state like that, how extensive is it? What is it like?
I think by now, so many people should know about, especially in the last 4 years, after women life freedom. I think Iranian in diaspora has done a great, job, raising awareness about the situation of people in Iran. One problem that doesn't let the world, to completely, understand the situation of Iranians is how defiant and resistant Iranians are. It's a good thing that we fight, we resist, but it just makes us look good to people. I mean, the world think, oh, their situation is not bad. Just go look at them. Look at the way that women are, dressing, for example, or they are going to universities. So many people with university degrees in Iran. So the situation shouldn't be as bad as they are describing. They don't know that it is us fighting and resisting. It doesn't mean that the situation is good. If it was going to be run by the will of this regime, if they could do, force people, we would be like Taliban now. The thing is that Iranians are resistant people, and it doesn't start just today or 47 years ago. Again, look at the history of Iran. When Iran was conquered and when Iran was colonized by Muslim Arabs, in 7th century, they came and they got this country under their rule. And for around 200 years, we have this famous book called 200 Years of Silence. So we didn't even were allowed to speak our language. Iranians were not allowed to speak Farsi, to write Farsi. So during this brutal time, still Iranian could, survive and could preserve their language. And after that, like 2 centuries after that, we got this famous book, Shahnameh, or the Story of Kings. That's the most popular Iranian, legend poetry. So we have been this nation. If you consider all these countries, all these people who have been conquered by Muslims, around 7th, 8th century, barely any of them speak their language. Look at Egypt. What happened to Egyptian, to the Coptic language, Coptic culture, religion, Christian Coptics now are around 10% population. And if you ask Egyptian about their history, they just define themselves as Muslim Arabs. Their heritage that, it's so famous in the world, it seems to be gone. Look at, Iraq. It's always so sad, for me. When I look at Iraq, for example, it's the cradle of civilization. It was a time, when Iraq also was part of, the whole region. Mesopotamia was, part of the Persian territory for a long time. When Arab actually conquered Iran, the capital of Persia, the capital of Sassanid, empire was in Tisfun, and Tisfun is a city very close to Baghdad. Today is Baghdad. So Iran's capital, Persia's capital, was in Baghdad. So it was part of this big empire, growing, fascinating empire. But anyways, if you ask Iraqis, do you remember anything about your Assyrian culture, your ancient, Aramic language? Nothing. They have become Muslim Arabs. They lost their language, they lost their culture. And the number of those who have survived, these minorities in Iraq, like Sa'ibin, like Assyrian communities, it's less than, a few thousands in people. So they lost everything, In Syria, the same thing. But
So that religious government is going to crush languages and completely demand conformity
yeah,
of you.
I'm talking about Muslim Arabs caliphates, For centuries they have been ruling the whole Middle East. They came to end by the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire was the last one, They started and they changed the identity of these ancient people. We know Iraqis are not Arabs. Arab is a language and is a culture. It's not ethnicity, except the Saudi Arabia when they actually were from. Aramic where was the culture, the language of in Iraq.
Aramaic, it's interesting that because I did some filming because I work in film and TV,
Mm.
I did some filming with an Assyrian
Oh,
group down in Wellington.
oh,
And
amazing.
yeah, and this was for their Easter. And I was like, filming their service and everything, and the chanting was wonderful. It was beautiful. But
Mm,
but then all these words would go ping, 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 ping in my mind, and I
mm,
was going, I know that word. Did I hear? Did I
yeah.
hear? What's going on? And then so I went afterwards and I said, "Are you? Why does that sound like Hebrew to me?"
Mm,
And they were like, "Oh, it's Aramaic."
yeah.
So for king, we'd say melech, and they
Mm.
would say melcha.
Yeah, and Malek is the Arabic word. So we're very close in origins. And it's so, for me, it's very sorrowful when I read the history of the region, of all these, communities, all these people, and how they have been lost and they have been like assimilated as, Arab language and culture. As much as I like Arab language and culture, I'm from southwest of Iran, and it's a place majority of people speak Arabic, and I love this language. I love, Arabic, singers and culture. So it's not about judging, language or culture. It's just about how religious rule, how Islamic rule in the region has taken the identity of people, away from them and how assimilated them. The same thing they tried in Iran. But look at us. We still speak Farsi, our language, and we still celebrate Nowruz and all other, Persian poetry and, cultural aspect of that. So it was to explain that we are resistant. And even with this regime, although they wanted, to take everything from us, we haven't allowed them. We separated our public life
So
from our private life.
there's been a lot of, and the regime would know that resistance is there,
Yeah.
and they push only too far, only so far.
No, they crush our private life. For example, if you are having a party inside, your apartment, your house with your people. So if they realize that there is a party going there and people are dancing and singing, and if they are drinking, oh my God, it's gonna be forbidden sin. They are gonna come, and arrest all of you. And that's what they have been doing. But over time, at first, for example, satellite TVs were banned in the country. Having the satellite dish was such a big, crime in Iran. Even before that, playing chess was forbidden. Can you imagine that?
So why was chess
I don't
forbidden? Because
know.
I'm interested in the whole censorship aspect of that. Why would something like a game
I
be?
think it's Khomeini that was part of Khomeini's fatwas or rules that he put in place, and I think part of that goes to they were against any manifestation of modernity. Even they said when clean water came, like this kind of having the water in your house, and people didn't need to go to this public kind of bath that at that time people didn't have bathroom inside their house to take shower. They had to go to the public one. So I'm talking about 200 years ago. And when they started to have water, clean water inside their house, these ulama or these clergies were saying that no, it's haram. This water, you should not use it, it's haram. So when this injection for different diseases came, they were against it. When women's suffrage during the Shah, when he gave women the right, to vote and to become elected to parliament, they were against it. So any, as I said, manifestation of modernity for them is forbidden. And it was the same, continued until today. So satellite dish was forbidden, even these cassettes that you put music to play, it was forbidden. The voice of women is forbidden. Even cycling, you know, even if women, having a bicycle, running a bicycle is forbidden. So that's crazy. How many things? Perfume. The smell of perfume is forbidden. I used to be a university lecturer in Iran for like 10, 11 years. So, and I remember every time these people, we call them herasat. I don't know what's the equal. So like morality police for organizations, for universities, they had an office, just to control, monitor all of us. And I remember if we were wearing like high heels or, perfume, they will ask us, to go to their office that, is temptating for men and, it's forbidden. So it's just crazy. And in such a very much like Taliban, as I said, if Khomeini could do whatever he wanted, he didn't like women to study. He didn't like women to go to university, to be in the public life. But I think the modern time didn't allow them to do all that. And the
So there was okay, interesting, yeah.
Iranian level of culture and education, and identity didn't also allow them to be like that. And the other difference, maybe the one that they have with Taliban, is that they are political. They are following political Islam. And political Islam means go out and use whatever tools available to
To influence.
to expand your religion. That's why they have used some aspects of modernity, and technology for achieving that goal.
And the Taliban are not really salesmen, are they?
They are like Wahhabis, the ones in
Mm.
17th, 18th century in Saudi Arabia. They are after purification of their religion and going back to what Islam was, at the time of Prophet.
But there is an irony there, because the Taliban are probably easier to deal with
Yes.
than the regime, the Islamic Republic. Like America could probably push the Taliban and
Yeah.
get concessions easier than they would be able to
Yeah.
against the Islamic Republic. So there's all sorts of different ironies. Are very
And I think
particular, aren't
that's
they?
how this regime has been able to, to find some legitimacy for itself at the international level. As I said, whenever they are criticized, they say, "No, look at the number of Iranian women who go to university and got university degrees," as if they are the ones, they put lots of obstacles in front of us not to do that, but it is us doing that.
But
So I think,
they
yeah.
do hide behind a mask of modernity in a way, but it's not really. But they're banning George Orwell and books like that. All that stuff. Yeah, of course. Yep.
People can find them, but even the singers, the Iranian singers who are in exile, and some of them are just legendary singers for our people. We have never been able to listen to their music in the public. We do it in our gatherings in our house, and it doesn't matter if it's man or woman. That's and it's just a song. So
Well, didn't I tell you that the Iranian Justin Bieber in the
yeah.
1960s
Yes, yeah.
was the Khazan
Mm.
at my daughter's bat mitzvah?
Oh,
He was a singer, Jewish Iranian, and he obviously left, but he had CDs. He was on TV in the 1960s in Iran. He
yeah,
ended up singing at my daughter's
yeah.
bat mitzvah, and he was like Pavarotti. It was just the most amazing thing. And he said to me, he said, "Look, a lot of your people there probably Ashkenazi, Jews from Europe or whatever. I know all your tunes." I said, "No, no, 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 no. You got to give us the Persian nagun, we call it. We have to hear that, because no one would have heard that."
Yeah.
And he did that, and everyone. It was just the most stunning thing.
The problem for the world is that they are many people are majority are ignorant. I mean, and it is not to blame them. It's just like why we expect them to know everything about Middle East. They don't know. But the problem is that they don't know, but they come to make a comment. That's the issue. If you don't know, so please don't speak over us. What people do that. I mean, in terms of the Middle East and this beautiful diversity that we have, what has been suppressed, Middle Eastern Jews, Middle Eastern Christians, Middle Eastern Baha'is, Middle Eastern Zoroastrians. Nobody knows about that. The world just see us as Muslim Middle Eastern, as if there is no other, culture and religion. And
Mm.
people just, when, if you talk about Jews, for example, for people, Jews are European Jews. And when it seems as if they even don't know that a huge number of Jews were living in Iraq, living in Iran, in Morocco.
Well, my children, their mother, they've got Moroccan
Yeah.
ancestry way back. Yeah.
And they speak Arabic, they cook the local food, they sing the local music. So the life is
I
really
cook Moroccan lamb
okay.
meals and stuff all the time.
And people don't know that. They just see Jews, that they are Western, they are white, so they are on that side. And indigenous Eastern are Muslims. And yeah.
Just before we wrap up, if you've got time, I do want to talk about something that's a bit thorny, a bit difficult, and it's difficult for me. So I want to talk about it because I'm a free speech absolutist. I do believe in total free speech in order for people like yourself to be able to express exactly who you are and what you need and all that kind of stuff, what your community needs. But when I go on X today, what I find quite fascinating is the uh, the level of disinformation
Mhm.
is very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like there's a Islamic Republic spokesman called Marandi.
Yeah.
Now, I know more than the average person. I don't know a whole lot. I could learn more and more, but I know that this man is a professional liar.
He's
He's paid, some people are paid to fix your car.
mm,
He's paid to lie.
yes.
And he lies and he lies and he lies. Everything he says would be a lie.
Mm.
If he told you it was raining outside, it's going to be sunny outside. That's who this man is. But a lot of people don't know the difference.
You.
And they debate him in good faith,
Mm.
thinking, oh, well, he's just got a different perspective to me. He doesn't have a different perspective.
Mhm.
He's a liar. What do we do about that? Because the equivalent for me, he was on with Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan did push him very hard, to be fair. He said to him, well, if you have free speech, criticize the regime right now. He
Yeah.
said, oh, what do you mean? I won't do it. And he wouldn't do it. So
Yeah.
so that was very good that he exposed him. But when I watched that, I thought, if we were in World War II now, Piers Morgan would be speaking to Goebbels,
Mm.
and Goebbels would be injecting misinformation
Mm.
into our population. How do we feel about that? You know, like, I guess the free speech argument is we need to platform people like you.
Mm.
But the issue becomes, and I think the media has a lot to answer for,
Yes.
they're not platforming people. They're sort of violating the equality of people by not platforming at least equally.
Mm.
So we get to hear from people like you. So how do you feel about that situation?
I think
Because this is a wartime scenario,
it
really,
is.
isn't
It
it?
is. I was just talking to a friend in the morning and saying that I think we are at the next level of war, and it is a media war. It's just, I can't describe to you how we Iranians are feeling, especially activists in the community come together, in hundreds, in different groups, to raise awareness, do social media posts. And we see that people are attacking us from everywhere, as if, it's not a political, debate. Is about what we are fighting for. Is, our people, the lives of innocent people is at risk. And then people will see how easily they change it into, political kind of debates. And part of that is media coverage. When I was talking about January, the massacre in January, and we're receiving no sympathy, no, solidarity, I blame it a lot on the media because, like, regular people get their information from, their TV, their radio. And if there is no report on that, how to expect people? I did this interview with a journalist about what happened in January, and I was saying it was like crying in a bubble. As soon as I put my foot, out of my house, the normal life was, going on, and nobody knew about our sufferings. And it's about all Iranians. And the other part is about, I think the other part is our fault. By our, I mean any person's fault if they are not getting information. It's because of algorithm, social media algorithm. If you only follow one specific ideology, if it is only leftist ideology, for example, you are not getting the other side of the story. And that's how, Instagram and, Facebook and other social media are working. But it's really difficult. We are still figuring out what we are supposed to do. When political leaders, party leaders, they are going and talk against us. When some human rights activists like Action Peace or Peace for Action, they were organizing protests against the war and in support of Iranians in Wellington without us knowing. And there is going to be another one on March 11 here in Auckland. And they are doing things, instead of us, doing the stuff for us.
Speaking over you.
And
Well,
how
I
dare?
get, I guess this has always been the way it is, though. Like the
Mm.
American Revolution was started with pamphlets. It was started with people printing off and handing them out. There was obviously no balance there in terms of what the King of England would allow to be
Mm.
said and what a revolutionary in America could potentially say. They had to break through. They had to convince people with pamphlets one at a time. So maybe it's not so different. And, I think that clip with Piers Morgan pushing back on Morandi is a good one. Like, I think he's got his number. But I have seen him platform people like that
Change.
Egyptian Cenk,
So,
and he sort of makes a fool of himself. I'm not
Yeah.
so worried about him, but
I know him,
Bas
surgeon. Yeah,
yeah, but
Bassem
Basim Yusuf from
Yusuf. Yes,
yeah, from Egypt.
he's a
He,
comedian at the moment, I think.
yeah, not very funny to me. But I was watching a Piers Morgan interview with him, and the guy was saying, obviously you can see the twinkle in the eye when people don't like Jews and they talk about Jews.
Mhm.
And but Piers Morgan just wasn't ready for a guy like that. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand that. He can't see
Yeah.
that. It's about education. But I guess for minorities especially,
Mm.
we have to take responsibility for the education.
And the other thing, at the same time, I'm getting really worried when we receive emails, phone calls. After the interview I had with Ryan Bridge about situation in Iran, and I was talking about how much Iranians fear the regime, but less, U.S. and Israel. Even Iranians have trust in Israeli people. And then I got phone calls that how much are you being paid by Israel, or people, sending me text messages accusing me of different things. Or even we receive emails, me and my friends, people emailing us with their university emails, accusing us of lots of different things. So it's scary and it's alarming to us. But at the same time, I know that there is a silent majority. It just reminded me of the one of the last interviews by the Shah when he was in exile, when the journalist asked him, how do you feel about what your people did to you? And he was saying, I know that the silent majority remains silent. And it was, so painful to him to see that. And that's why people are calling his son's name now, because he was not, hated by majority of people, but just people remain silent, they were feeling like, oh, we don't know, let's see what's going to happen. And now in present day, I think majority of people understand the things, but there are loud voices who are
Mm.
taking media and social spaces.
I think the other thing too, to go back to what I said about evolution,
Mm.
like free speech doesn't necessarily work overnight,
Yes.
but we keep chipping away. And I think, when we would hope, I can't be too optimistic, but we would hope that if you're on the side of right, we do get there in the end.
Yeah.
That would be my hope. I mean, it's been a very long struggle for you and your people,
Mm.
but I, I think there is change coming, and a lot of people are being exposed
Yeah.
too.
We are very
Um,
hopeful, Dan. And as I started my talk today, it was about Renaissance. Renaissance started in the Middle East in 19th centuries, similar to Europe. And it was interrupted by 1979 revolution in Iran. It was interrupted not just for Iran, for the whole region, because after the change in Iran, the whole region became chaotic. And now what we Iranians are doing, hopefully we are getting rid of this regime and we are in the final phase of that renaissance. I see a very positive and promising future, not just for my country, for the whole region. This regime falls, all these extremist groups in the region are going to be weakened or they are going to fall. And people in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Iraq, in Syria, hopefully they are going to, have a different life. So I think the renaissance for the Middle East has arrived. And the world is going to change hugely because all the plots of these Islamists, these so-called, leftists, is going to be exposed to the world very soon. So that's what I actually feel about, in my heart, and I hope for that.
oh, I think my grandkids, I've said this before, some of my grandkids will probably live in Saudi Arabia before they live in England.
Mm.
You never know.
Yeah, yeah.
Could happen.
I think it's a
Um,
time.
Yeah. Well, look, it's fantastic that and what you give to the community and what you give to New Zealand, I think is worth me commenting on too, because we need to hear from you. We need to hear from you in this country, like everyone, for their own education, for their own betterment,
Mm.
and so they know what's happening out in the world, and they get shaken out of their slumber when it comes to some of the freedoms that we often take for granted here.
And I think there should be some people, me and my friends, we are risking a lot, for
Yes,
ourselves, in our personal life, I'm running a community organization, an NGO, and I always receive kind of advice that, what you are, working for is going to impact your organization in the
I
environment. This
I get
work,
that too. Hey, shh,
yeah.
shh, shh.
Yeah.
You know,
But I think for us, raising awareness and, doing the work for our people and country is much more important than our personal lives and, how we are going to be judged. You talk about, if you don't align with an ideology, you don't get, to progress in academia or in some, environment like the one we have in New Zealand. And yeah, I think that's how it is, but hopefully it will change.
Thank you for listening to Free to Speak. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and consider sharing the podcast with others. We release new episodes regularly, and subscribing is the easiest way to stay up to date. If you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, you can contact us at podcast@fsu.nz. If you want to find out more about the New Zealand Free Speech Union, visit fsu.nz.